I don't know, Lamont. That sounds like they're being pretty sussy.
Sassy?
Yeah, like sus.
Sus?
Like they're being very suspicious.
Suspish?
Yeah, like suspicious.
Oh, suspicious.
That was sus.
I'm Lamont, and I'm an ever changing vessel.
And I'm Leah. I'm starting to learn that change is not that scary.
And you're tuning into the
The Lamont
Lamont
N
N
Leah
Leah
podcast.
podcast. Hey guys, so we are in the second part of November. November is also known as National Inspiration Role Model Month.
Interesting.
Yeah. So who's your role model, Leia?
Myself.
I have a couple. Um, today is November 20th,
Mm-hmm.
and it is Transgender Day of Remembrance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a trans friend, if you want to go to an event, there's probably a whole bunch going on. It's a
Mm-hmm.
great time to just go and remember people, learn names, learn stories, join the community. I encourage you to do that.
And if you do want to learn more about what it is, and maybe, have some questions answered, we did do an episode last year for Transgender Day of Remembrance. We'll link it in the show description, of course. I think we need to do another one. I feel like we answered a lot of really important questions, but I think a lot of people have more questions. So maybe next year or maybe sometime later in season 3. Little teaser right there. We will bring that up again.
All right. Another thing that stood out, of course, was November 24th, which is Thanksgiving. It's Turkey Day, guys.
Food.
So let us know what some of your favorite Thanksgiving traditions are. Let us know what you're thankful for. This is a great time of year. It's probably my second favorite holiday because of family and food.
Really? It's very low down on my list. I
Really?
don't like Thanksgiving Day. It's just a pregame for Christmas.
Christmas? Oh.
I'm a Christmas person.
Um, which brings us to November 25th, Black Friday. Please be careful when you're shopping out there. People can be
Hmm.
crazy.
And hold on, shout out to November 26th, which is the day after Black Friday, is Small Business Saturday. Make sure to support your local small businesses or the online small businesses. I know there's a lot of us who have them, including us. And it's good to support your local people. It supports your local economy.
So that brings us around to November 29th, which is National Day of Giving. That's the day where you can just give back your time, donate to a shelter, work at a soup and kitchen. There's lots of different things you can do.
Hmm.
Which brings us to our final date that stood out, December 3rd. Let's Hug Day. So I think Leia is either got to drive to me or we got to drive to Leia so we can give each other a hug.
We'll meet halfway. We'll go
In the
meet in
Valley Mall.
No, we'll go meet in Retchie Canyon
Oh Lord,
with the
that's a good way to
donkeys.
die.
We'll hug with the donkeys.
Oh my goodness. Today on the Lamont and Leah podcast, we are looking at shifts in time regarding customs, values, and beliefs.
Cool.
We have invited back our friend, YouTuber, and author of The Spirit, the Scribe, and the Journey, John Pearson.
Always good to hear from John. And speaking of John, he's here, so let's go let him in.
Let's go get him. All right. Welcome back, John.
Thank you. It's good to be back. I've missed you
Yes.
guys.
We've missed
Oh,
you
thank you.
too. We missed you
Yeah.
too.
uh,
Would you please take a moment to reintroduce yourself to our listener and viewer audience?
sure. I'm John Pearson. Um, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio area, and have done a lot of strange things in my life that make people think I'm weird. But other than that, what I'm doing now is the work thing day to day. I'm a product analyst, and I do YouTube stuff on the side, stories from my faith journey, and happily married to wife Marie, who's an award-winning artist locally, and so on. So um, still like to hack around on a guitar, play some heavy metal stuff. Uh, Anything else think I need to share?
No,
I
that sounds
think,
great.
yeah, I think that sounds great. I'm also weird, so it's okay.
Yeah,
I think we're
um,
all a little bit weird.
I know, right? We should do a whole episode on what the heck does normal even mean, because
you know,
I'd like to know.
You know?
back in my partying days, back in the 70s and early 80s, I used to tell people, I'm the person my parents warned me about.
Right?
Yeah.
All
All right.
right. So, are you guys ready to jump into our main topic today?
All right, let's do
Good.
it.
Okay, so today I want to kind of focus on how we have shifted through time and our thoughts, our beliefs, our behaviors, our customs. Um, it's even more relevant now because of things that have been going on in the media, like entertainment media realm. So, like Leigh and I had planned this for a while, but like I thought this was really relevant to bring up. So, this is what happened. I was at Friday Night Magic, and a friend of mine who is a white guy.
You need to explain what Friday Night Magic is, because people are gonna be like, "That sounds very sexy."
Uh, sounds like
Friday
sounds
Night
like a
Magic is a
spinoff
card
of
game.
Magic Mike, man.
No. All right, so Friday Night Magic is a card game where like you have different creatures or commanders or animals that have gifts due to whatever on the card, and then you just beat your friends up. Like it's pretend. It's pretend, but you follow
Yeah.
these rules, and this rule can cancel out this rule, and this magic spell can like dash that magic spell, and who's gonna be the victor? And like we just
Uh,
battle each other.
is
That
that Magic the Gathering?
yeah, Magic the Gathering. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and this one friend of mine, maybe an acquaintance now, I don't know. He was like, I'm upset. Like, what do you think of this? And so he shows me this picture of this beautiful black actress who's starring in the series Boleyn as Anne Boleyn. And he's like, I don't like this because Anne Boleyn, this is a historical piece. Anne Boleyn is white. This is erasing our culture or erasing that culture. And I was like, I kind of felt sympathy or empathy maybe, but then again I was like, dude, it's just a show. Like, and everyone, like anyone who's gonna be educated about the Boleyn and King Henry and England, they're gonna know those people were white. So they're just doing a different take on the story, and it's either gonna make money or it's gonna fail. Like, that's it. And like he was like, no, like but this and the Little Mermaid and yada yada yada. And so like I'm like, hey, like the Little Mermaid's a great, like she's fictional, right? Like I get your point. She's historical, but like dude, like how many times has a white person been in a person of color's role? And like we're just changing, like society's changing, we're being more diverse, we're trying to be more inclusive and stuff. And so that kind of brought up this whole conversation of like change and like what is going on in today.
Interesting.
Yeah. You know, a thought that comes to mind when you said about actors portraying others back in the 40s and 50s, we had a lot of white people that portrayed Native American Indians in movies, and most of the time not that well. But you know, uh, Hollywood does not treat history well for the most part. It it uses it as a springboard to tell tales, to tell stories, and that's what they do is just tell stories. But they also often use it as a way to influence culture, influence people's values, and so on. And so it's interesting. I mean, he sounds like someone that highly values history. I don't think that he was upset so much that he was white and they're taking a white character and portraying them with a person of color. I think I hear this isn't being true to history. They should respect history more, kind of stuff. So, but
That's a great perspective, John. I wonder if the shoe was on the opposite side because he didn't seem like he really cared. Like when other people, like when white actors did people of color roles.
mhm.
But I wonder, like the conversation? Was that the motivation behind the conversation that he actually started with me? So
Oh,
I think you bring up a good perspective and point.
well, and it is, right now we're in a season where I think Hollywood is being much more open to Black themed movies and shows. And they are taking some comic characters that have traditionally been white, and now they're putting out shows with African Americans in those roles. I haven't watched it yet, but we've got She-Hulk, which is taking a traditional male character and expanding that to a female, which some people might have a problem with. I don't. I mean, once again, it's storytelling. It's like you said, it's Hollywood. Um, but it is interesting how that provoked him. And that's actually one of the ways to discover what people's values are is when they get provoked by something around them, a person or a culture or something, you can discover values by what people get provoked about. So last time I was with you guys, did I talk about the circles of values? And this isn't something that's out on the internet. It could be, but it's just my own thinking about how you have core values at the center,
Hmm.
and those you build other values upon, and you go out just a little further. And you guys can't see my hands. And then you go out a
Okay,
little further, and you go out a little
gotcha.
further. And for your visual folks, Leah, it might not be a bad idea to make that and just kind of stick it in the video so people can visualize that. But when it comes to values, people have core values that they just hold on to. Like, I highly value truth. And so myself, when I find somebody um, doing something that misaligns truth or trying to think of the right word where they fudge around with it or something, that can bother me, especially like historical things. And Hollywood portrays a lot of historical things in an untruthful way, and then people believe that. People think
Right,
that's the truth. But anyway, in these concentric circles, at the very center you have your core beliefs, and then when you go out one layer, you have beliefs or values that are built upon those core, and then the next ring out you have things that are built upon those, and you have some that are looser, that necessarily aren't built on the core, but they're some value that you hold, but not as tightly. And so, what I've discovered in my own life through just contemplation and just looking at my own self, the closer to my core something gets provoked, the more difficult it is to respond in a nice, peaceful way. I can get foot stomping mad. I can get foot stomping angry sometimes when I feel a core value is being disrespected or stepped on or disregarded, um, and so on. And as I have observed other people, once again, like your friend at the card game, you can find out pretty quickly sometimes what people's core values are because they'll fight over them. And for me, part of that reason is core values have a lot of stuff built upon them. Since I value truth, there are, as you go out those rings, there are things that I believe that are rooted back in truth. I really don't like people lying to me. I mean, that's built upon that core value of truth. And I don't like people manipulating me because that's a form of lying and untruth, and so on. And so I can, depending upon the situation and who it is and so on, I can get kind of testy. Sometimes I'm just like, I'm offended. I don't vocalize it to them. I just exit the relationship. Like I'm thinking in the car dealership.
mhm,
I've talked to car dealers that were trying to manipulate me to buy the car they wanted to sell rather than helping me get the car that I came in interested about. And
right, right.
after 15 or 20 minutes, and I realized they're just not even going to show me the car that I wanted to look at. And this is a real life experience. I went to a car dealership. I had printed a thing off the internet that said, "This is the car I'm interested in test driving and perhaps buying today." I never saw the car. They kept showing me these other cars. And I didn't like any of the cars they were showing me. And so finally, after 20, 30 minutes, I'm just like, well, thanks for your time. And they're like, where are you going? I'm going to go on the internet and find another car.
Yeah.
So,
I wonder if they even had that car there, and so because they didn't have it there, they were showing you the other cars. I mean, they could just said that,
yeah,
you
I,
know.
I realized later I had gone into the new car department wanting to buy uh, a previously owned car. and they knew that. And rather than directing me over to the salesman that dealt with previously owned cars, they tried to sell me a new car. And so I'm just like, okay. And I had actually had previous encounters or experiences with this particular dealership, getting another car worked on. It just happened to be a brand that it was a Mitsubishi, and they worked on Mitsubishis. And I've never been back. And I'll never go back. And it's just, I carry that with me, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Great relay and how truth is the core and how it kind of builds out from there and that story. So the question that I have today, and that's probably the only question I have today, is how has American culture changed over time? And I think we should start with something light, like maybe music. Like, how has
mhm.
our culture changed over time?
I think in terms of like just if we're talking music, I think a lot more music is like digital now, whereas
Yeah.
before everything was, like people physically playing instruments. I think even like I'm surprised even nowadays when you hear like a violin in the background in some of these like songs, you find out it's completely 100% digital. There's no one actually playing any instrument. I'm always like, dang, that's the improvement.
Mhm.
Some might be like, that's slanderous. That's slanderous talk,
Some
Leia.
could and keep that idea in your mind because I know that plays into like what we're trying, like the point we're trying to like bring up today. Um,
Well, an interesting twist on that, Leia, is in the late 80s through the mid 90s, um, studios were able to begin using um, computers to capture sounds and then use MIDI devices
mm-hmm.
to do things with that.
Yeah.
And so they were paying musicians to come in and just play a piece. And they would just record that piece, and then they would digitize it, and then they would make a waveform out of it, something, a patch that somebody could then use a keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
And they would just have them play notes. And digital has gotten to that point now where they can create anything and make it
Yeah.
look real. Music, I don't know how far they got with stuff as far as putting musicians out of work, but I know that they have put a lot of orchestral people out of work because they're just. I mean, why pay a 40 or 50 piece orchestra or a 200-piece orchestra to come in and record something that you can now use a keyboard and build the same stuff for
Mm-hmm.
less money?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I wasn't even thinking along those lines even, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that's happening, right? So I was thinking more along the lines of like how Leia said, like everything was live first, and then we found a way to capture or record that music, vinyl, then a tape player, then a CD, and then an MP3 player, and then an iPod, and now we're just using our phones.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think in the last episode, um, never mind. Anyways,
Well, and the first one that they actually did that you didn't mention was player pianos in the
Yeah.
1800s. Not only has the distribution of music changed, but what music people listen to has changed. So if you
yeah.
go back 250 years ago, you had to hear music live if you were going to hear music,
Hmm.
and most of the music being done was done with quartets and small ensembles. And it was
Yeah.
usually they were playing Mozart or Bach or someone like that. And then you had a few composers in that day, but most music, it was live. You had to do it live. And then in the 1800s, the guitar became a more prevalent instrument for people to do things with. And so as those instruments became more available and they became more popular, that created a way for people to experience live music at a lower cost. They
Hmm.
didn't have to have a four-piece of people that cost money because their instruments cost a lot more money and so on. So that's another kind of deal. And then when electric guitars came about, that was a whole nother revolution of how to create music. And now guitars could be loud enough to play with bands. Before that,
Mm.
an orchestral person playing a guitar in an orchestra, they were really drowned out by the
Hmm.
orchestra. They added something, but they were drowned out, and it was hard to amplify them. And then once they started amplifying guitars and basses, then that changed the kind of music that people were making and the kind of music people were consuming. And then you had pedals and things, and people started playing around with distortion, and that just broadened things. And so the taste in music is something that has evolved over time as well. And
Yeah.
now, I mean, we've got such an eclectic um, collection of music. And the current generation, my generation, when I was young, you were either a jazz person, a country person, or a rock and roll person. If you were white, if you were African American, you were blues was your core thing. And people that liked rock and roll, they liked blues too, because a lot of rock and roll came out of blues and out of country. But my generation, you were polarized, and generations now, they're much more open to all kinds of music and influences, um, and so on. So that's a value that has changed socially with people.
Yeah, I find it more norm to like be eclectic and like several different types of genres versus being polarized. Um,
Unless
Leia,
you're really into dark heavy metal. Those guys are polarized.
sometimes they can be. But even some of those people, like some people that I know that are into dark heavy metal, are like into some other things as
Yeah,
well. But like they love their metal.
yeah. Well, John Five, I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's played with Marilyn Manson and played with he actually played with David Lee Roth a bit. He plays with Rob Zombie, does a lot of stuff with him, but he actually started out playing country music that he heard on Hee Haw on TV. And then he moved to California when he was 16 or 17 to try and make it in music. And that's when he actually became much more well versed across the board. If you're a session player, you're going to play whatever people are paying you to play. But yeah,
Yeah, so Leia and I, we grew up in a religion that had very strong opinions on music and kind of like a downward way of looking at music. Leia, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Um, I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, just like anything outside of like pretty much classical, pretty much
Christian
classical, not
contemporary.
even Christian contemporary, dude. Like drums? Oh no,
Oh
no, no,
yeah,
no,
that was
not
not
a
allowed in
single
our
drum.
church. Yeah.
Like guitars could only be acoustic. Anything electric was seen as of not the Lord.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's like classic. They liked bluegrass for some reason, but that
yeah,
might just be like that just mean like it was mostly a white church, so
yeah.
that might have just been them. Um, but yeah, and then I just did want to point out that like music was a really good example of how things can change and how things are accepted. And like I was
Even
saying
like
in
even in churches, really quick, like even in churches, like we can have drums now, and like
mhm,
not at ours still, but like at other churches that are like part of our denomination, they have electric guitars, they have drums, they have things that were like taboo, like for the longest time, even in the 2000s, like
Mhm.
have it's changed.
yeah.
So if you go back to 1000 AD to 1400 AD, when they had monasteries with a lot of monks, monks would do chants. I don't know if you guys have ever listened to some of those things, but everything was in unison. Everybody singing the same note. So that was very, very important. And then you had people like Bach and Mozart, and these guys came along, and they started creating music with harmonies, and they were considered sacrilegious because everything was supposed to be in unison, and the church fought that for a long time, and so that move from unison to harmony was a huge step, and we don't even take that for granted now. I mean, most hymns have 3 or 4 part harmonies in them. If you have a choir, they have harmonies, but that was a huge value change in music.
So music was a great example of how things have changed over time and how they have progressed over time and how we see things that may have been like negative in the past as they're more positive now. So our example was like the style of music. So we brought up digital music versus classical, and then I think music, while it's very like it's a popular subject, everyone knows what we're talking about. I think our main focus of today's episode is really like how things shift and how people accept them. Um, but I'd like to also point out that there's a lot of people who don't accept them.
Yeah.
And I'm talking like less about music and more about other topics. Like, let's see, what is another one? So the increase of like smartphones. Like today, now every single person has a smartphone. I know like even like 10 years ago, it was a big thing where some folks were just like, I'm not switching to smartphones. That's going to be terrible for myself. I won't figure it out. It won't be useful. We won't need them, right?
Right. The
But
government can track us. They just want our information. Yada yada yada.
and granted, while some of those things may or may not be true, depending on who you're talking to, depending on what you're involved in, depending on who you are, what you're doing, like the just vast amount of people that do have smartphones now has changed, and having a smartphone is now normalized. Other things that are would be like same-sex marriage. Like nowadays, at least in America, it's very prevalent. I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think almost all the states now have
Yeah. In
like
2016, I want to say,
yeah.
it was declared like in all 50 states that it is legal to have same-sex marriage.
Yeah, and so if you talk to someone who was alive in like say the 60s, I've seen videos of like couples who have been together, older couples who are just like I could have never imagined that this would be okay, you know? Um and it just brings up, and then of course we know a lot of people who are not okay with it still. And there's other things like women having jobs, women not being home like makers, but instead having being career professionals, whereas their spouse may be at home being the homemaker. So I guess the question would be like, what, like, is this good for us? Would be my question. Like, I know I have my own personal opinion on the matter, but like, are these changes over time where something that was negative, quote unquote, becomes something positive, quote unquote? How does that affect us over time? And is it a good thing that this happens? What does that mean when that shift takes place?
Well, I would comment that it's not just something negative becoming positive. There are
Yeah,
things
yeah.
that used to be positive that are now considered negative.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And some of those never should have been positive.
Right.
And some of the positive things that we have now, I'm not sure are really positive, but they're accepted. They are
Mhm.
things that are normative in culture.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things we have now, you know, the word cancel culture, and that's a whole nother conversation. But if
That
you
is a
look at the
whole other.
yeah, if you look at the history of the United States, there's always been a cancel culture. It just depends upon who the dominant culture is and what they value and what they disvalue, which that kind of ties in with what you're saying, Leah, and that there are things that if you go back 50 to 75 or 100 years, it was considered a highly negative thing, and now it's a positive thing, or now it's accepted, and so on. And you know, one of the phrases I've heard my whole life is the only constant is change. And so, you know, I'm 65 this year. I have folks that are my age that are wrestling and struggling with some of the changes that your generation is like, yeah, this is cool. About time we did this. And I just remind them, it's like, guys, you know, nothing stays the same. Everything evolves. My
Yes.
generation
Yes.
in the late 60s and 70s, we turned our parents' culture on its head. We changed so much stuff. There was so much social unrest and tension with what my generation was doing. Those that were born in the 1950s, they just embraced a whole different culture and lived into it. And it wasn't that they tried to impose that on other people, they just lived into it. And our parents' generation, they couldn't figure out that stuff. They just couldn't understand why we weren't going along with the rules. You know, society has rules. Why are we breaking the rules? And so on. But you know, I think I mentioned last time we talked. If you go back to the 1920s, there were cultural changes that were taking place in the 1920s that some people had issues with. In the 19 teens, there was a organization called the Women's Temperance League or something like that, And they were the ones that really, really pushed for prohibition on alcohol. They said alcohol is the biggest evil in our society. It's destroyed more families, it's destroyed more homes, et cetera, et cetera. People that get really into alcoholism, they can't hold jobs and they're a drag on society. So they got it outlawed. And this is an interesting testament to the
Yeah.
value that alcohol had to the people who didn't agree with prohibition. And there were businessmen that said, oh, we don't mind breaking the law. We'll give people what they want. And so they actually, prohibition just birthed a whole industry of black market alcohol. And then there came a point where everybody said, we can't stop it. There's no point in trying anymore. And they reversed the laws and so on. But that's an example of how you had some folks in a society make a change that affected a lot of folks in society. And the folks that got the change, they thought it was a positive change. The folks that couldn't buy alcohol anymore, they saw it as a negative change. And then not everywhere then okayed selling alcohol again. When I moved here to Lexington, Kentucky, there were a lot of counties that were called dry counties. And people living in dry counties would go to the next county that was not a dry county to get their alcohol, to take it back home and consume their alcohol. Or they'd go to bars in the wet counties and then they'd try to make it home without getting arrested.
Yep, I know that. Loma Linda used to be dry. They used to be dry, but
I was gonna, I
let me
wasn't
tell
sure.
you.
I was debating if I was gonna say.
No, it used to be dry because they're like a blue zone, right? If no
Okay.
one knows what a blue zone is, it's different spaces in the world that are considered one of the healthiest places to work. It can be a city, it can be a town, it can be an office building, it can be whatever, right?
And they
So there's
call those
different.
blue zones?
They're blue zones, yes. So
Okay.
Loma Linda, I think they're still considered a blue zone, but because
No.
of this, they were a dry county. And it's interesting because a few years ago, I went to go visit a friend who was living there,
Yeah.
and I was gonna bring just a few beers or a bottle of wine or something because we were gonna have dinner together, and I forgot and I was like, oh dang it, okay, well I'll stop at the store and I'll just get like a nice drink to bring, like some juice or something. I walk in there, there's an alcohol section. I was like
Ah.
I was amazed.
Where in Loma Linda?
At the Walmart
And
right
where's
That's not
down
Loma
Loma
Linda?
Linda. That's
the
Fulton.
no the Walmart down on Barton,
Oh, really?
right across from the medical center.
Oh my God.
So
I
is that in
know.
California,
Yes,
Melinda?
yes, yes, yes.
Is it a county or a city?
It's a city.
A
A
city.
city. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's like maybe just the Walmart. I don't go shopping there.
Yeah.
No, you know what? I saw alcohol at the Stater Brothers too.
Uh,
That's right. Like not too far from there.
Yeah. So
Okay, so
you,
maybe they're no longer a blue zone.
they are still a blue zone, but I think alcohol is not. See, there's another
Prohibited.
shift. I
Yeah.
don't think I think people are more aware of like alcoholism and what is an appropriate amount to drink. I like at least the people who I've observed and the people I know personally, most people are aware of like, okay, well. So
so
I don't
when
know
you,
if that has changed, but
yeah, when you said blue zone,
Mhm.
what I heard in my head then was blue laws.
Hmm.
And in Kentucky, there were what they called blue laws, which were laws rooted back in earlier times. So it used to be that stores couldn't be open on Sundays. And,
Mhm.
I mean, even gas stations and stuff couldn't be open
Yeah.
on Sundays. And so that was a blue law. And then they started easing that up, well, if you're near a highway, you can be open, if you're a gas station and stuff because of
Mhm.
people traveling. But that's a shift that has happened here in
Yeah.
Kentucky is that Sunday is no longer considered a sacred day
Yeah.
in terms of um, stores being open and
Mhm.
so on.
It's still like that in Germany.
Is it?
Yes, the some restaurants will open for the morning,
Okay.
at least in like high tourist areas,
Hmm.
and some of the convenience stores will be open just in the morning so people can grab a few little things here and there, but pretty much just everyone go home,
Yeah.
rest, go on a hike, go walk. Yeah, that was interesting to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in France, since we're talking about like this really quick, it is illegal to work on the weekends. So people do not work on the weekend in France.
So everything
Interesting.
shuts down on the weekends?
I think so. I think a lot of businesses do shut down.
Wow. That's
Very
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Well,
Um,
as a result of COVID, one of the things that I'm still trying to accept and see as a positive is I can't go to the store at midnight and get things because everything closes between 9 and 11.
I
and they didn't used to do
know.
that.
That drives me crazy because I'm a night owl. And I'm just like, oh, I need something. It's 1 a.m.
Yeah,
And I'm like, well, guess not. I have to actually sleep or something.
yeah. When
Go
I
in the
moved
morning.
here, yeah, when I moved here, I moved to a town called Wilmore, and it's where Christian college is and the seminary is. And I went down to the gas station on Sunday evening to get a soda, and they were closed at 6 o'clock. I actually had to drive to another town to get a soda, and I was like, okay, welcome to Wilmore. And then I found out that they pretty much, I mean, they shut down, and I'm like, I'm used to 24/7 here, that I can go somewhere 24/7 and get what I want. But I had to drive out of Wilmore to, 15, 20 minutes to find someplace open.
Right?
So,
So I I wonder if change is constant, like we brought up, and like I've observed that too. Like if you even look at a history book, the dates between things are not that much.
yeah,
If you look at timelines of anything, there's not that much time. Like maybe 10, 20, 30 years, which really isn't that long of a time in the grand scheme of things. So if change is constant, I do wonder why people are so bothered by it.
Yeah.
Like even myself, like I look at like, oh my goodness, what is it, like the newest thing is like, I guess, um like jeans. It was a big thing a few like months ago, maybe last year, where like now it's weird for people to wear skinny jeans, and
Is it?
baggy and loose jeans are in, which I don't
Again.
mind because I am comfortable, okay. But like people were up in arms about like, well, I love my skinny jeans, da 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 da.
Please wear your skinny jeans.
Just wear whatever you want. That's a whole
Yeah.
other
that's right.
thing. Like just do what you want. But I'm curious why you guys think people are just so uncomfortable by things changing when it's very obvious that things constantly are changing.
I think people just have a need to complain. I think it's part of the human condition. Like, I think that's something that is inherent in us, that we just have a need to complain. What do you think, John?
There's a Billy Joel song coming to mind. He has this line. He says, "What's the matter with the clothes I'm wearing? Don't you know that your tie is too wide?" And so in the late '60s, early '70s, wide ties were the fashion, and
Yep.
then they went to real skinny ties and
And
stuff.
then we
But
went even skinnier in the 2000s. They're
yeah,
like this tiny.
yeah. So actually, in terms of change, um, there is change people can be a part of initiating, and there's change that they're not part of initiating. And people tend to flow with the change that they are initiating much easier than the change someone
Yeah,
else is initiating.
good point.
Yes.
And so, and the other thought too is there are areas where change does happen slower. So, New York, I mean, they talk about the New York minute, that's about 10 seconds. Things change all the time, very much in New York. And that's constant. I mean, if things don't change, you wonder what's wrong. You're looking for the new stuff. I was talking with a friend this week who lives in a farming town northwest of Dayton, Ohio, about 40 minutes. And they're still complaining about cashiers in the grocery store being replaced by self checkout. And I posted a thing a year ago and said, well, you realize there used to be this thing called the horse industry that existed because the way that you moved things and the way you got around was you hitched a horse to
Yeah.
your wagon and then you went somewhere. And in 1911 or something, they finally started manufacturing automobiles. And then in the 1920s, they just really started. And then all these people got put out of work because there was no need for horses anymore. And when
Mm-hmm.
you think about the trickle effect, it wasn't just the horses. It was people who took care of the horses. It was the people that shoed the horses. It was the people that provided hay for the horses. It was people who provided tackle for the wagons and stuff. And then you weren't moving the wagons anymore. So the wagon makers, they either adapted and started making wagons with electric motors, or they went out of business. And so, and so you had a whole bunch of people that were not part of making change happen, but that change radically changed what people did for a living, and the industry and just all these businesses, they either adapted or they went out of business. Same thing with watches. Up until the 1970s, Switzerland was the world's leading watchmaker. And then they figured out a way to use crystals to power wristwatches. And the people in Switzerland said this will never catch on. And now Switzerland is no longer the predominant watchmaker in the world. There's all different kinds of ways now to make watches, and Switzerland didn't keep up. And then the same thing with cameras. Kodak was the elephant in the room when it came to cameras, and they refused to go the digital route. And now um, they I think they got purchased. And there's a little bit of residual stuff they get from people still using film to do things, but you know some people see it coming and they go with it. Other people see it coming and they are screaming at the top of their lungs, no, no,
Yes.
no, no, no.
Yes. Yes.
Um, me, I took this test once. It's a personality kind of test called Strength Finders, and it measures your cognitive thinking, which is your not your intelligence, but your gut level. You just react this way or that way. And one of mine was called adaptability. And so I've been blessed with the ability to just flow with whatever comes my way. Change is, I like change and I like initiating change, but, the job I have, company I work for, they got bought 2 years ago, and I've been through a lot of change at work, but we've lost 50% of the people we had because they couldn't adapt to the change. They just couldn't deal with
Mm-hmm.
the fact that now you have a different boss and you have to do things a little differently than you did before, and,
Mm-hmm.
and so on.
Yeah.
But initiating change, most people flow with that. When you're not initiating change, a lot of people end up struggling with that when it's imposed upon them.
Yeah. That's a really great point. Um, I know I in the last few years I've been trying to embrace change a lot more because I was also someone that when something would change, I would just lose my mind. Not angry, just anxiety.
Okay. Yep.
Not an angry person, just very anxious about stuff changing.
You
But
had some insecurities related to that.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, who doesn't? But I guess yeah, just being comfortable and being secure in something can be the idea of change can just be extremely threatening.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, after realizing that things do change and it's better just to adapt or you're left behind and now you're sad or upset or you got to catch
Yep.
up, it is useful to be more adaptable to your changing environments. John, since you said that you're more like you're an adaptable person, do you
Mm-hmm.
have any like sort of advice for people who may be threatened by change or and want to become more adaptable to things that are changing?
Well, the first thing is you need to do some self-reflection and get to the
Agreed.
root of whatever is bothering you with the change, because it might be valid or it might not be valid, right? And the second then is to ask yourself if you have any power or influence over the change that's taking place. Can you help modify the change so that it's not necessarily what it's going to be? If you have nothing about that, I mean, it's just going back to the serenity prayer that AA uses.
Mm.
Lord, give me the grace to accept the things I cannot change, um, the power to change the things I can, and the grace to know the difference. And so it's really one, you have to know yourself. You've got to be willing to say, okay, if this is bothering me this much, where is it coming from? And it very well could be valid, you know. Um,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
and if even if it's valid, you still then have to say, okay, how do I feel about this? And how do I survive this stuff? How do I maintain my sanity? You know? And once again, I mean, if it's a change that cannot be avoided, and let's just look at things that have always been change factors in our lives that we can't avoid. Everybody's parents die at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when my mom got cancer, my younger sister, I went up to see my mom, and I was talking to my younger sister, and she was just all anxious. I mean, she was just beside herself. I'm like, what's the matter? And she goes, well, mom got cancer. She's going to die. And I'm like, mom's 82 years old. Any day over 70 is a gift. Did you think she was not going to die sometime? She goes, I just never pictured a world without mom in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I laughed. I'm sorry.
No,
No,
that's
like you bring up such a great
That
point.
is a
Like,
great point. Yeah.
and I for me, I saw humor in that also, Leah. I was like, okay, that she just never has reckoned that. And so for her, my mom getting cancer, that was a huge deal. That was very challenging. And she was the only sibling left there, and she was my mom's taxi and took her to the doctor and made sure she kept all things in place and all this kind of stuff. So when my mom got cancer, that clued my sister in that, okay, mom's not going to be here
Yeah.
forever. And we talked through that. And then she began to adapt. She's like, okay, I can't change. I can't stop this. And so she began the grieving process then also.
Okay.
Sometimes change involves loss in our lives.
Mhm.
And so I think death is probably the one kind of change that everybody can relate to, and that makes a good illustration to say, okay, what do you do with that? I came home from um, one evening, it was dark out and there were fire trucks in front of our house. And as I walked up to the house, I saw firemen in my bedroom. And my sister was outside and I said, what happened? She was, well, the house got hit by a lightning bolt and it went down the corner of the house, caught the corner of the house on fire down in the living room. And then it was working its way back up. And luckily she called the fire department and they got it put out before it got to the roof. They said if it got to the roof, the whole house would have been gone in no time. Um, but my first thought when I saw them up in my bedroom was, I've got $10,000 worth of guitar and recording equipment in that room. And I was like, it's gone. And I just immediately, I felt that loss. I felt like, oh my God, how do I replace all this stuff? Can I replace all this stuff? And so, that kind of change I think is good to illustrate that most people can relate to. And then you can start talking about other kinds of change because I mean, culturally right now, there are people that are experiencing euphoria over the changes taking place, and there are people that are experiencing grief over the
Yeah.
changes that are taking place. And there's a lot of, um, I think there's a lot of fighting going on that doesn't have to, you know, but it's going on, and so on. And some people don't want our culture to change. Other people are welcoming the changes. Um, and there's some people, I'm seeing now some people that welcome the changes that are now stepping back and going, I don't know if I really like these changes that are taking place. And that's across the spectrum, lots of different views we could look at. But, my advice to someone is first contemplate, look inside, get a handle on what's happening in your heart. If you can't do that by yourself, call Lamont up because he does that with people for a living. If I understand correctly, you help people.
Mainly children, but one day I'm back in my MFT program, my MFT LPPC program. So maybe one day soon,
Yeah, yeah.
I can like totally work with people.
And that's not maybe, that is. But what I'm really saying is find a close friend that will listen. You don't
Yeah,
need somebody to tell you what's up and what, how to deal with it. What you need is somebody first that's just going to listen to you because there's something about talking your stuff out loud to somebody else that clarity comes to you. Lamont, you probably see this with folks as people talk, they find their own answers that you already could tell them, but them finding it is a much better solution than you telling it to them. But
absolutely.
and then writing it down, I mean, just write a fictitious letter to somebody and just say, this is how I'm feeling, or journal, and but get clarity on what it is that bothers you. So, like in my Spirit Scribe Journey journals, I had to deal with my brother. He became a transgender and he called me up and said, hey, I've made a life decision and I need to talk to you about it. Tell me when and where you want to meet. And what I struggled with was his demand that I tell him when and where we were going to meet for him to do this. I'm like, well, if you've got something this close to your heart, I mean, something that's important to you, I'll meet wherever you want to meet, wherever you're comfortable. And he kept demanding that I tell him when and where we were going to meet. And I really struggled with that. And in my book, The Spirit Described the Journey, I described that. I described seeing him in the street talking to my sister, just wishing that he would leave so I could go to work because I didn't want to deal with him with that. And as I processed it, it was the fact that he was trying to control things. He was trying to control me. And then when I talked with him, I understood, where his heart was at. And um, that had to be one of the toughest conversations he's ever had in his life because I'm his only brother. I mean, how do you go and tell a brother that you're making a life change like that? And I'm a Christian, and so I got to give him kudos. He stepped way out on a limb and came and talked. And first thing that came up in my heart was just receive him, just let him be who he truly is, and just know him as he is today. And so I let him tell me, and we actually started reconnecting. He was 11 years older than me, so when I was 7, he left to go in the Air Force, and most of my life from 7 on, I would see him every 3 or 4 years. And I had a season for about a year where he moved back home, and we worked together for a guy, and so we got to know each other. And then he moved out to Oklahoma, and I didn't see him again for a good while. And then he shows up one day saying, "Hey," but I journaled that. I said, okay, what's going on in my heart? And I just wrote this stuff out, and it gave me clarity. And then I could just rest in the fact that, okay, this is hard for him. He's got to, I just need to flow with him. If he's being controlling, he wants to, demand this or demand that, I can flow with him. And that might have been my adaptability, Leah, that gave me the grace to do that. But I did that, and I let him share that with me. And then, he was around a bit. So I just trying to reconnect to him as he was at that time. But talking to the men that are listening, if you have somebody you truly trust with your heart, if you're dealing with something, just talk to them, and you're going to discover stuff in the talking. If you can't talk to them, write it down, put it in a journal or put it in a letter to a person that you trust. And then after you put it in a letter, give it to them and say, hey, in a couple of weeks after you've read this, let's get together and talk. Help me figure this stuff out. And so on. So
I think you gave some really good advice on reflecting, different ways to reflect through friends, through writing. Thank you for that. To close up this topic though, I wanted to personally thank you. A few months ago, you went to Pride and you sent me a whole bunch of videos of people in your town because you were just being so loving and connecting, telling videos on a video saying "Happy Pride, Lamont, Happy Pride," and I got I don't know how many videos you sent. You sent so many. I think that was really really cool, and I think wow, that's from my friend John across the country who's a Christian who choosing the path of love, and some Christians are still struggling with this
mhm.
idea of pride and stuff and being accepting of others as they are and meeting them where they're at.
I'm comfortable with people making those lifestyle decisions. My job in this world is not to police everybody else and make sure they're living the way that I think they should. God gives people the freedom to do whatever they want with their lives. And I trust that God is going to speak to people's hearts about what he wants. Because there is a whole lot of stuff that God's holiness is bothered by, that we just take verbatim. I mean, in Proverbs it says God hates a lying tongue. I mean, people. I've never heard a sermon on that, and I've talked to pastors like, why don't you preach on that if you're going to preach about you know this other cultural thing? Well, God says He hates this. I mean, okay, so it's in Scripture. God hates that. Why don't you confront people about the way they lie to their spouses? But anyway, Lamont, it was my wife was in an art contest, and I was downtown, and I went down to check it out, and it was just on a whim. I thought, I know you told me previously that you love Pride festivals, and so I thought, I wonder, what would happen, and so I just walked up to a booth and said, hey, I've got a friend in San Diego who loves Pride festivals. You guys want to say hi to him? And they're like, oh yeah, sure. And so I just put on Facebook and started recording and or whatever, and just started sending them to you. And I'm glad that they were a blessing to you, that they made you feel valued. I'm sure that it was unexpected,
It was.
but the it was interesting just how people responded. And there was actually some folks that I knew there that were Christians, and they saw me and they were looking at me like, "What are you doing here?" And then I'm like, "I'm taking video for my friend Lamont. You want to say hi to him?" And so it was interesting just seeing what was going on and seeing where people were at and stuff. And there was a lot of stuff going on. They had yeah, but anyway, I'm glad it was a blessing to you.
Yeah, so thank you. And then, John, thank you again for coming on to our podcast once again to talk with us about this very important topic. If people wanted to get a hold of you and want to talk to you about this subject or any other subject, what would be the best way for them to contact you?
So on my website, b4eternity.com, that's the letter B, the number 4, eternity.com. If you go to that website, there is a menu at the top called Contact, and that will send me an email. I am cautious about just throwing phone numbers and email addresses and stuff out there. And so
Of
I
course.
created that as a way for people to connect. And then when I can trust somebody, I'll go further with them. But and then also I'm on Facebook. I mean, people can message me through Facebook. I prefer that people would, if they do that out of the blue, that they would say, "Hey, heard you on Lamont and Leah's podcast," and so on. But yeah.
Excellent, excellent.
And of course, as always, those things will be in our show description. So if you guys need to link anything, check out the show descriptions. We put everything in there every single time. Um, is there anything that you're working on right now? I know off camera we were talking about how you are trying to be more active on your YouTube channel. Is there anything else that you're working on that you kind of want to like shout out really quick to let people know about?
Hmm. I've put together a prayer journal, and I'm working on the scripts for that to do training videos for the prayer journal. I'm toying with the idea of doing the National Novel Writers Month in November this year. The acronym for that is NaNoWriMo, and you can go look that up. I'd love to spend 20 minutes telling you about it, but we don't have 20 minutes. So nanowrimo.org, and you can look up how it started and everything. But it's basically a month long. Can you write 50,000 words in a month? Not necessarily edited good words. It's just, can you get a first draft of 50,000 words
Oh
done?
God.
And I did that. I've done it several times. I succeeded once, but I have some books that I'm considering writing. And this is, you don't get money or anything for this. What you get is a graphic to stick on your NaNoWriMo page and on your website and stuff like that, just saying you hit the 50,000 word mark. So I've got some books that I'm thinking I might just run with and just use this as a motivator. It's 1,820 words a day, I think, to hit 50,000 words in the month of November. So it's not a lot of writing. I mean, that's like an hour and a half a day or something. So if you can write every day, you can make it and so on. So I'm gonna do that. I just hit 65 and I'm planning to work till I'm 70. But man, there is a part of me that's like, in a year and a half on retirement age, do I really want to go to 70? So that's just one of those things that, my wife kind of thinks I'm retired because I've been working from home for 2.5 years now since COVID. I'm in the basement and I come up for air, to get something to drink or something. And she's like, honey, can you go do blank for me? And 20 minutes later, I'm like, I got to go back to work. She's like, okay, when you come up for another breath of fresh air, I got something else I need you to do. But it
Yeah.
would be nice to just have full control over my life and my time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
well, I look forward to you having that, whether it be a year and a half from now or maybe
yeah,
till you reach that 70 mark. I really do hope you will take advantage of that time.
yeah. Well, you guys are very gracious. Very, I like you guys. I like talking to you. It's, privileged to be a part of what you're doing.
Yeah.
You don't have
Thank
to
you.
ask, but you do. So praise God.
So, finally, is there any message that you would like people to know from your heart? It could be about today's subject. It doesn't have to be about today's subject, but just something that you want people to take away as we close up this episode.
Yeah. I believe that everybody has value in this world and you have gifts and talents that are unique to you. And you are a gift to the rest of the world. And I believe that um, you should get to know yourself. You should trust yourself. You should rest in your true identity, your true self, and then give yourself away to the people around you and be the blessing you were intended to be.
All right, John, thank you once again. Thank you. And thank you guys for watching and or listening. Today's life lesson is change is inevitable. Change is a force that always pushes things forward. Whether you're comfortable with it or not, things will change. And preparing yourself for that change helps you to better equip for the future. So, how will you prepare yourself? What will you put in place? Think about it. And that is today's life lesson.